Today, I'm with Professor Mary Uhl-Bien, an award-winning professor of leadership in the Department of Management and Leadership at Texas Christian University. Her research expertise include complexity leadership, relational leadership, followership, and leader-follower relationships. Thank you so much for accepting to speak with me today.
Oh, Israel, thank you. It's a delight to be here.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. I've had a great day, and it's even better since I get to talk with you.
Oh, well, I feel flattered. Well, today I want us to talk about a subject that you have written about and you have probably spoken about across multiple audiences, and that's followership. How did your interest in followership begin?
I am so glad you're having me talk about followership. Oftentimes, I get asked to talk about complexity, and while I love complexity, I think that followership is a real love of mine. And it's interesting because even when you and I were just chatting, you were saying that followership is not a concept in Africa. So, how did I get involved in followership? It's exactly that followership is not a concept in a lot of leadership work, and that's a huge problem because you can't have leadership without followership. And in all the time that we've been studying this, we've acknowledged that there are followers, but we haven't understand that there is this thing called followership. And in the work that I did, you mentioned that you do work on social change. And the work I did with Sonia Ospina on social change when she and I were really digging into relational leadership. It became clear in the conclusion of the book we wrote in 2012 that there is no leadership without followership. And then we had a statement in there, I think, and I believe in this, it is in following that leadership is created. So a person can make an attempt to be a leader, but if no one follows them, they're not a leader. We see this in organizations all the time with managers, where subordinates in the organization are supposed to follow the leader, but they don't. I think people see it in schools with teachers. We see it in politics when people decide that they're no longer going to follow someone and they remove them from leadership. So followership's absolutely essential to leadership, and I think we've been missing it.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I know this is not the first time you'll be pursuing a research path that is quite not popular. And you mentioned earlier that you do something related to complexity leadership. How have you dealt with any pushback in the field of followership?
So you saw my response when you sent the email questions and you said, has there been any pushback? And I just wrote back laughing, yes, there's been huge pushback to this. And in fact, shocking pushback to me. It's been shocking. It has been more difficult to get the followership work done than the complexity work because people are locked into their mindsets about what leadership is. They see this as something that we've always done, and they really struggle to get their brains around the idea that we haven't done followership and what's different about it. So the reason that I got into it was because I started in leader member exchange. So if you think about leader member exchange, there's a leader and there's a member. Now, you understand because of the experience, more recent experience you've had in academia. When you're working in academia, we have the research mentor, and then we have basically the protege. And that was me. So as we worked on leader member exchange, my mentor was the leader, and I was the member in that. But I did so much leadership. So I didn't conform to the idea that I was only following. And he certainly didn't conform. In fact, the reason he chose me was because he wanted me to lead. So it became very clear in that relationship that there was a co-creation happening. And it looked more like a partnership, which is what LMX talks about, is the leader member exchange is a partnership relationship. So that then took me into relational leadership. And I always wondered why I was so different from everyone else. I always felt like this oddball weirdo in the field. I think a lot of people got into the field because they love leaders and they're interested in leaders and they are come from the more psychology background and they focus on the individual. I just I didn't see it that way. I love the relationship. I was taught that leadership is a relationship. So that naturally morphed into relationships and relational leadership. And once you get there, now you understand the co-creation and the role of the follower in it. So that's how I got into it. Pushback, when I started working with a colleague, and I'll name her Melissa Karsten, she was a postdoc and she got a lot of pushback. People, senior people in the field said to her, "That's career suicide. Why are you doing this? Nobody wants to follow." And they actually laughed at her. "Oh, you're a follower. I'm a follower." And they laughed at her. But to her credit, she was really strong. And she knew that this was the right way to go, and she knew there was something here. And I would say that Melissa has really carried this. She's carried the followership work. Without her, it would not be where it is. So she's been a full partner in this the whole way through. But she also could tell you we've had a lot of pushback on this, and it can get frustrating. Some of the pushback is we've always done this. This is no different. Some of the pushback is we don't like the way you're looking at it, and you're in opposition to leadership. And it's just not, that's not the case. So, really, what we're trying to do is get people to understand there's leadership and followership, and these are part of the same construct. You can't have one without the other. And to people who are really infatuated with followership right now and want to just go be followership scholars, I'm not a followership scholar. I'm a leadership slash followership scholar. So, you need to have both sides.
Wow, that's an interesting point to note. So, does that mean that you don't believe there could be a followership scholar, just like you have leadership scholars?
There can, but what I don't want to happen is and thank you for asking that question. I don't want followership to do what leadership did, was consider one side with the idea that there isn't the other. To me, a followership scholar will focus on the followership side of the co-creation, but they have to acknowledge it's part of a co-creation. So I'm really trying to get shift the field from the idea that the name of what we study is leadership. I don't do that anymore. I now write it, and it's very clunky. It's unfortunate we have to do it this way, but I write it as leadership slash followership because it's the same thing.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you so much for the explanation. So, I know you spoke a little bit about, why it's very important to study and research about followership. Can you just, reiterate some of the reasons why you believe anybody should understand about followership, especially if you are, passionate about leadership or you're a leader.
I think that followership is a skill, just like leadership is a skill. And we need to train people in that skill. As a leader, I just finished a role as a department chair for 2 years. And the work that I did as department chair was fully dependent on how good the people I worked with, how good they were, and the way that they engaged with me in co-creation. So that those people being skilled and those people knowing effectively how to engage in followership and co-create with me is what made me effective as a leader. So that's why I think we need to study followership and we need to develop it. We need to let people see how important it is, that their role is just as important as the leadership role.
Hmm, thank you. So now I want to talk about two articles you've written, and the other time you mentioned Melissa
Yeah.
Katsi, and I think you co-authored an article with her in
Yes.
2014 titled "Followership Theory: A
Yeah.
Review and Research Agenda." So
Yes.
what we're going to do now is I rigorously read this article. I've encountered the article in the past, but because I knew I was interviewing you, I was looking for the toughest questions. Unfortunately, my questions were not as tough enough because you mentioned that they were easy.
Oh, that's so sweet. I appreciate that so much.
So I'm gonna um read out some quotes from the article and ask for your input. So the first quote I would read is in page 87 of the Followership Theory, a Review and Research Agenda. You stated there, if an essential aspect of leadership is to engage and influence followers, then studying how leaders engage followers and why followers are influenced by these actions is necessary for understanding leadership.
Yes. So that's pretty much what I just said. When I was a leader, When I became the department chair for our department, I had to understand each of my followers and how they engage. And just like we ask subordinates, employees, and organizations to adjust to their manager. Managers have to adjust to their employees as well. And so I had different kinds of employees. I had some who were great and could just go off and do things on their own. I had some who needed a little bit more guidance, and with those, I think they would traditionally have held back and stayed in the more subordinate role, but I saw the potential and I really absolutely needed that kind of co-creation. So what I did was I co-created an empowerment. I built up a trusting relationship with the people. I understood how their brain worked and how they preferred to do things. I asked them when I met them the first time, how do you prefer to be worked with? Here's how I prefer to be worked with. And then we engaged in that together. And as I empowered, I said to the person, you'll make mistakes. I'll make mistakes. It's okay. I've got your back. So it really, in that time, became one of the most fun relationships I've had and a true partnership. And it just makes it so much more joyful, especially when you're helping people really live to their potential. So I think that that's the work of being the managerial leader in terms of how you engage with followers.
Yeah, thank you. Before I move to the next quote, you mentioned something about, treating followers differently based on how they would like to be treated.
Yeah.
There are certain leadership theories that explains this. For example, situational leadership would explain something like this. Now, how do you think we can have or we can get to the stage where we would have independent theories in followership and leadership that will be addressing the same issue?
So I'm actually going the opposite direction. I'm going to co-creation theories, which we'll get to when we talk about the more recent paper. I think I think it's kind of a modern version of situational leadership theory, and I got really excited about it. So let's talk about that when we get to the
All
more
right, no,
recent paper.
no problem. I look forward to that. So the second quote I got from the article in 2014 is in page 89, which says the basic assumption of a followership approach is that leadership cannot be fully understood without considering how followers and followership contribute or detract from the leadership process.
Right. This is now an accepted premise. So I think the field has finally come to understand this, but they didn't really in 2014. And as we were trying to advance the followership research, it really shifted people's brains to have to think about this. They were so trained on if something works, it's the leader who did it. And, Jim Mindel was the first person to talk about that with the romance of leadership. But it has been incredibly powerful. Even after Mindel wrote that, people were still in it. So it's essentially the idea that he presented in 1987, if you can believe it, that the outcomes are not just about the leader, they're about the followers as well. And I would say now they're about the co-creation between the leaders and the followers, which we can elaborate when we get to the next paper. But without understanding followership in that role, in the parts that they play in all of this, we will never get there. And then I think the other thing that happened in 2014, we were asked to write a review piece. So, and my colleagues were asked to write it, and then they brought me on and they said, we think that we need to do something a little bit different here because a lot of the review pieces are of followers. Followers is not followership. So the way that this was being done was a lot of papers and people who thought we were studying followership were just looking at followers. And again, using Mindel in his approach to follower-centered leadership, it was still leader-centric. It was how followers see leaders. And that's the role or the approach that was primarily used by 2014. And what we said is, no, it's not just about how followers see leaders, it's how followers see themselves in the followership role and how leaders see them and how they co-create. This was a brand new idea. People couldn't get their brains around it. It was really difficult for our field. So, and I think it continued to be for a few years after, but Then I would say more recently, it's starting to take off now. They finally are getting there, but it's taken us a long, long time to convert the field. But I think, again, Sonia Ospina and I in 2012 said in the conclusion of our relational leadership book that leadership and followership are a co-creation. And the scholars we had in that book agreed it's a co-creation. So the followership article that was written reviewing all the work prior to that, which was follower-centric, follower-centered leadership, added this other tiny little piece of what came from the relational view, which was just a tiny little slice of what was going on, saying that the relational view says it's a relational exchange, it's a relationship, not just the LMX relationship in the hierarchy, but this relational co-creation. And when I went to visit Matt Salveson in Sweden in 2010, I really presented him with this, and we came up with the idea that it's leading and following. If we were to get the core of this, let's say, Israel, you're the leader and you're the manager and I'm your subordinate. If I'm an effective follower, I'm not just subordinating. Would you agree with that? Do you want me to just subordinate?
No, I would prefer you to lead sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the key is that if I just subordinate, I'm just following you, I'm doing what I'm told, and it's really not going to help you get your job done. So what you need to do is let me lead some of the time. And I would do that. But then you need to follow me. So this is where it came to the idea of leading and following is the behavioral interaction or exchange. You're still the manager, the managerial leader. I'm still the employee, the subordinate, but in our interaction, there's a dynamic leading and following.
That's an interesting insight. Thank you very much. So the next quote I want to read now is one that I actually found very, very practical. And in this particular 2014 article, you stated that you cited Kelly, Robert Kelly, and some other scholars about their contribution to followership, typologies of followership, and you shared that there are some followers who exhibit exemplary followership. And
Yes,
yes, and they sometimes display proactive behaviors. And
yes,
in this quote, you stated here that leaders may see proactivity as insubordination, a
mhm,
threat, or an ingratiation attempt, or overstepping bounds.
that's right.
Yeah, how do you think followers can maintain these proactive behaviors that are beneficiary to their organizations, even while navigating unsupportive leadership?
Right. So I think that what the voice literature shows, and the proactivity is really proactive behavior from followers is things like voice. It's been demonstrated very clearly in the voice literature that sometimes voice is not liked by managers. That if a person speaks up to me and I'm the manager, there are times that I don't like it. And that's shown over and over again in the voice literature. So this is where I think the followership skill and the type of co-creation that they generate together matters. If the leader has a more traditional view of I'm the boss and you're the employee or the subordinate, if I come in, let's say you're that boss. Okay, we'll just put you in that. You're the manager, you're the boss, I'm the subordinate. I come in, I have a very strong proactive approach. You can imagine, I'm a co-producing follower. I don't like being subordinated at all. I love followership so much, but I don't like being subordinated. So I would have a hard time with that with you. I would have to hold myself in. And if I did speak up, you wouldn't like it. But let's say that you're an empowering, or even better for me, a collaborative leader, and you see leadership as a collaboration. Now, what you want is for me to collaborate with you. Now I can speak up and engage. Sometimes I might push too far, but if we have the right relationship, you can say, Mary, stop, pull back. And I'll say, okay. And in fact, I've had a manager say that to me before, a department chair, when I was leading a lot because I'd been an interim. And I said, how can I help you? And she said, stop leading. And I said, great. I don't want the department chair job anyway. I will stop leading. But it's that the nature of understanding that co-creation. So if you're going to be proactive and you're going to voice, you have to understand where your manager, your leader, your dyad partner is in it and what they can take and how they can engage with you most effectively. And it will be a give and take. I mean, there will be times when you should do it a lot. There are going to be times when you need to stop. So I've learned for myself that sometimes I should push, but then there are times when I have to stop and I just support the leader. It's not the time for that anymore. So I will do everything I can to support where the leader is trying to go with things. So if you think about that from the standpoint of situational leadership, we always thought that was the leader side. The leader needs to adjust to the subordinate and the
Mhm.
context. But it's also the follower side. They need to also do situational followership. I would
Right.
use the word contextual.
Okay. Sounds good. I really appreciate your response there. It's very obvious that there is still much to unravel in terms of followership research and most recently, you published an article in 2026 this year, and you referenced some of the things you shared in 2014. It was obvious that you were not really satisfied. You appreciated the fact that people have conducted research in followership, but you believe that we can do more and there's more to be done. And I'm really interested in knowing why you revisited the 2014 article and what changed since then.
So I think Melissa will be okay with me speaking for both of us. Melissa and I have been very frustrated. We think that followership, as I described to you, is pretty obvious, pretty straightforward, pretty clear. And I think our hope has always been it would get further. And you just said there's so much more to learn. And I think our frustration is why? Why can't people get here? What is the challenge that they have? And they continue to say, well, you haven't defined it, or we don't have clear definitions, or we've always studied it. So it really challenged us. And where this paper came from was Fred Morgeson, who's the editor of AROPOB, had contacted me and asked me to write a paper on followership. And so, of course, I brought Melissa in, and she and I got on it right away. My first attempt didn't work. I will admit I was department chair. I didn't have time to really think through it. And then Melissa did the most amazing systematic review I've ever seen. So she went through all the data. And then she said to me, oh my gosh, I'm just fried. My brain is fried from reading this. This is so annoying. But when we looked at it, I said, Melissa, it's exciting because we can see now what the problem is. And instead of us trying to tell people, let's use the data. Let's use the evidence in the publications that are out there. So I know you had another question, and this will tie to that. 93% of the papers were reversing the lens. Essentially, what they did was they just flipped it around. So we've looked at leaders. Now we're going to take the same methods and we're going to look at followers and we're going to go up and we're going to use exactly the same post-positive approaches and survey measures and all the traditional ways of thinking about leadership. Just flip it around. And that is not what's going to get us there. Now, I'm not trying to say we shouldn't do reversing the lens. We should, but it's the reason followership has been held back. We need to study more the dynamic co-creation. We need to understand this in a more contextual way and with different kinds of research methods. So that actually came out of the paper, and that was the frustration. My first one was really frustrated. Luckily, Fred didn't let me publish it. But the second one really was there to say, hey, listen, we've been studying this, we've been talking about it. Yes, at least we have some movement. We have acceptance that it is a co-creation. Have acceptance there's followership, but now we need to push ourselves to different methods and approaches.
Yeah, I appreciate your response. I have some quotes from the second article titled Toward Construct Clarity in Followership Research. And my first quote will be from page 172. You said there, it was stated there, reversing the lens approaches the easiest way for scholars to pivot to followership research
Yes,
because they use existing leadership theory and empirical approaches that can be easily mirrored,
yes.
i.e., reversed, to
Mhm.
study followership constructs.
Yeah, that's what I just said. Now, here's why this is a problem, and I said this in the paper as well. If you are a scholar or a student of leadership and you've read the work carefully, you understand the field has been criticized. There have been glaring critiques of leadership theory, saying basically We've missed it completely. I've watched one scholar after another who ends their career, wins the award, and says, all the work I've done, my career has been meaningless. And this theory isn't means nothing. And that's happened also with LMX theory. And I just feel if we continue this approach, we're going to end up there with followership as well. It's not going to accomplish the promise that it brings. So we have to break out of those mindsets. I hope people out there listening who are young scholars will listen to this carefully and be willing to push back on their mentors and push back on the field and bring some new novel approaches to it. So I will share with you, I'm working with two of those scholars right now, two young doctoral students, young scholars, doctoral students, not necessarily young students, but they're pushing hard on followership and they're pushing their mentors. In one case, the mentors come around and now we're partnering. It's great. And then we're doing social network analysis, which is a great way to look at followership. And in the other, it's a person who was being pushed into survey methods who said, I just can't do it. And now we've got a really beautifully designed qualitative study digging into cultural effects of followership and how followership is different in different cultural contexts. And I'll share with you, that's the other finding of the 2026 paper was, I think there were numbers in there. I can't remember them now. I used to be able to cite the numbers, but over 100 studies that had international scholars or looked at cultures. And yet Israel, they didn't acknowledge the culture. This strong Western view that all leadership is the same, and that if I'm studying it in a different context and not the US context, it's a limitation of the study. That just destroys me. Right now, I feel that. It is not a limitation of the study to look at this in a different cultural context. It's a strength, and it will help us learn more about the many kinds of co-creations that can happen. So we must look at it. We must consider that a strength of the study and examine it in different cultures and say, in this culture, this is how followership works.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know that you shared in your new article the different, typologies of culture,
Yeah.
and you tried to delve into that, and I appreciate that. The second quote I would be taken from page 185. It was stated in your paper you identified, okay, it wasn't a quote, it was just my personal notes. So in your paper you identified four types of co-creation:
Yes.
management, subordinateship by exception, collaboration, and toxic illustio.
Yes.
Which of these types might be effective for combating toxic leadership and how? Also, which might be effective for handling complexity and wicked problems? I know you're a wicked problem, or you're a complexity researcher, but I want to cite Grint from 2010 that
Mhm.
explains wicked problems as problems with no known solutions.
Yes. All right. So the short answer is that when I wrote the paper, the toxic Lucio was intended to be the one to deal with toxic leaders. I've talked with Ibeke Mergen, who wrote the most beautiful paper. I love her toxic Lucio paper. It was such an incredibly crafted piece of scholarship. I'm so amazed by her. She and I talked, and she said that's not exactly the right way to handle the destructive leader. So I think there's promise there. I think that needs to be very much fleshed out in terms of what that co-creation work looks like. So now we have a table that Melissa and I are putting together that has a range. So there will be a range of what we're calling destructive leadership co-creations, leadership followership co-creations, and we'll explore that more. For the complexity, the answer is enabling leadership, and I know that one so well. So I presented that one actually in a keynote to an organization that I've done a ton of complexity work with. It's a healthcare system here in the US. And they asked me, they have partnered fully with me in co-creation and in complexity. So they asked me to give a talk to their 700 top leaders, and I presented the co-creations to them, this followership approach. They loved it. They were a little overwhelmed, not badly. I mean, they were kind of scratching their heads because it is a different way of thinking for many of the lower middle level managers. But when I got to the enabling, they understood it because they've been doing it. The people doing it with me fully understood where I was going, and it's a network approach. So you've got a lot of people engaged in that. So the best thing that happened out of the AROPOB is that when we were nearly done, Fred Morgeson said to us, "Can you put together a table?" And then he said, "Can you, or a figure?" And then he said, "Can you talk about future research?" And we were down to the wire. We had no time at all. But all of a sudden, it popped for me, the future research section. That's where the co-creation table came from. And Melissa and I, in a matter of days, said, "This is it. This is the answer. Let's flesh it out and show people what it looks like." We sketched out just the ones we could think of in literally a matter of days. We now have that much more crafted and are very excited. And that's the major direction we're going. So my recommendation for future research is co-creation, which is both sides. Now, it might be that I want to go deep into this side, but I shouldn't go deep into, let's say, the followership piece unless I understand how it works with leadership. So I would say frame everything up in co-creation and what kind of co-creation is happening. Then you can look at the leadership and followership side of the co-creation.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much. I know, I was supposed to have a question, but then I'm changing my mind.
Okay, go for
Uh,
it.
there are certain times that an individual plays both the leading and the following role, and I know you acknowledge that in your article. How does co-creation come into play when it is just one individual that you're trying to study, and how they have played both the leadership and the followership role?
Oh my gosh. Okay, if you're studying one person, it depends on what you're trying to look at. So give me more information about what you mean. What kind of study would you do of one person?
So for example, maybe I'm in high school and I am leading a team, but then I know that I'm just the leader and I haven't gotten the power yet to get more followers. Yeah, I haven't gotten people who have bought into my leadership. And then at the initial stage, I'm playing the leading role. I am also the one implementing the task.
Mhm.
How do you think, yeah, I can study followership in that context?
This is such a great question, and I'm so glad you went to it because I work with undergraduate student leaders in a program where we have a 3-year program. And at the end of it, senior year, I have them do failed leadership. And they always bring up student leadership context. Now, I'm going to say to you, student leadership is, in my opinion, the hardest leadership you can ever do. The hardest leadership, harder than anything in organizations. And this is because they don't have real hierarchy, right? In student leadership, you're leading your peers, and those peers don't necessarily accept your authority. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And some of your peers might actually be competing with you to try to be the leader.
Mhm.
This is incredibly difficult. In college settings, what happens is the peers are there, but usually they just want to put something on their resume. So they're not really committed to leading. And then you've got these leaders trying to lead, and they don't want to upset their colleagues, their peers, the other students. They want to be popular, they want to be liked.
Mhm.
But at the same time, nothing gets done. So then they do all the work. So I think that this is a context that has been understudied. I think it's the most difficult leadership context. Now, maybe if it's been studied, I haven't seen it because
Yeah.
I looked mostly at business. But I think that's the real challenge. And again, that's where we need to start to train people in the leadership followership model.
Interesting.
Did that
Thank
did
you.
that answer? Did that
Yeah, yeah,
answer your
it did. It did answer. I think what I got from that is that, we need more research in that area.
for sure?
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. So, as we conclude, I would like to ask you an icebreaker question, and that is, what is one fun thing you enjoy doing outside of research and teaching?
I love this question. So the thing I enjoy most is being with my family, my husband and my kids. And my kids are adults now. In my opinion, there's nothing more fun than adult children.
Mm,
We have, especially, so my daughter's older and she's married now, but my two boys, oh my gosh, they're just a riot. So when we get a chance to go and travel with them and they're in that mode, it's a very playful. My daughter used to be this way. We used to be able to do those kinds of trips together. Her life has just got taken a turn to be more serious. But I think that traveling with the adult kids and doing trips, and then if I can add nature. So if we can do those trips and have it be in nature, that's even better. And then I'll say my final thing when I'm not doing those things, because I don't get to do them often, is gardening. And I think that it's very hard to garden here in Texas, where it's 110 in the winter or in the summer and below zero or below freezing in the winter. Gardening is complex. So anybody who's done gardening, I'm a complexity scholar. I get out there and I think, oh, I'm just going to plant something. Oh my gosh, there's so much complexity to gardening. So
Hmm.
I think that's also something very interesting and a fun, a hobby that I enjoy.
Well, thank you very much for your time and thank you so much for sharing. I have had a great time learning from you and personally having to interact with you.
Thanks, Israel.